Hello, everybody. This is the Monday Night Pod. Tyler Fensky. Today we're going to be continuing from Psalm 51, discussing the fallout from David's sin.
Yeah, so if you guys have been following us from the last few weeks, we were discussing David's adultery and then ultimately the killing of Uriah the Hittite. And this was then the judgment that God brought to David because of that from 2 Samuel 12, verse 11. First of all, the sword will never depart from his house because David despised the Lord and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be his own. Then verse 11, this is what the Lord says, out of your own household I'm going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. So we talked last week about there was immediate punishment from this then, where the son that was born to David and Bathsheba died. And then this verse 11 and 12, calamity out of his own household. This was something that then took at least 12 years to come to fruition, starting with a sequence of events where you can read through this in 2 Samuel 13, 14, and then leading into 15, where starting in 13, what happens is David's son rapes David's daughter. Now, the daughter was the sister of David's son, Absalom. And Absalom then is seeking revenge against brother Amnon, who had committed this deed, which he then does. For 2 years he sits on this and then sets it up where he has Amnon murdered. He then flees, goes back to Geshur. That was his mother. That was her. She was the daughter of the king there. So he hides there for 3 years. And then it says that David was consoled concerning Amnon's death, who Absalom had murdered. So then Absalom returns to Jerusalem, where he's there for 2 years without seeing David. Joab, the commander of the army, kind of brings about this reconciliation there. And then you have from that point, then 4 years where Absalom is now living in Jerusalem and is fomenting this conspiracy. So all told, we also have a course of time statement there in 2 Samuel 13. But it's at least 12 years from the time of this prophecy to it now being brought to fruition where his son Absalom is going to go after David.
Yeah, and so Absalom really starts gaining ground here, and this is really highlighted in 2 Samuel 15. One of the things he had going for him was his handsome appearance, right? And so picking up in 15, it says, over the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. All right, so he's already got kind of this little army together. And it says whenever anyone would come with a complaint to be placed before him, before the king for a decision, he would interject and talk about how he could bring justice to them. All right, and so he gains traction with this. Ultimately, he ends up going to Hebron and has people shout that Absalom is king in Hebron, all right? And so he really gains traction, and all of a sudden David hears about this and begins to flee.
Yeah, Absalom's kind of an interesting character because, you see some insights into his personality, into, as Tyler referenced, his physical appearance. To me, reading about Absalom and the dynamic of Absalom and David, David is a type of Jesus, right? And Jesus was then, known as the son of David, right? And Absalom, to me, kind of serves almost as a type of Satan because you see some just similarities here. One, that he's going to now challenge David for the throne as Satan did to God, Revelation 12. He's generating this following as Satan did in heaven, where a third of the angels followed Satan, right? Revelation 12. And a lot of this is based off of his appearance. Right, it says in 2 Samuel 14, it says, in all Israel there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. You read the description of Satan from Ezekiel 28, it says he was the model of perfection, perfect in beauty.
Wow.
Right? And then talking about that as a reference is Absalom, it says here in Ezekiel 28 that Satan's heart became proud on account of his beauty. So you you see this dynamic of how Absalom is then almost leveraging that with how he's treating the Israelites, because they would come to him, the people that would be coming to David for complaints. Now Absalom, as it says, provided himself with a chariot and horses with 50 men to run ahead of him. So that is the behavior of a king, right? That's what kings would do. In those day and ages, you even see Adonijah trying to do that in 1 Kings when he sets himself up to be king, is he gets a chariot and 50 men to run ahead of him, right? And now he's working this where, people looking for, they got these complaints coming in. He's kind of leveraging that. If only I were appointed judge in the land, if only it wasn't David, if only it was me, things would be better. And then it says, also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. I thought that was kind of interesting because it's like he's almost he's a celebrity, right? He's getting praised over his appearance. He's the king's son. He's behaving like the king. And then when they would, whenever anyone approached him, he would then treat that person then as an equal. And that's a real way of, you see people very impressed by celebrity, period. But now he's going to, put an arm around them, take the picture with them, and people are loving that, right?
Acts like the common man.
Right.
And that gained him a lot of traction. That's a really interesting point that you said. Almost reminds me of Satan in the garden with Adam and Eve too, right? To where it's talking about, how much better would this garden be if you had the knowledge and ate from that tree, right? As if it's not already good enough, as if Israel isn't already good enough with David, right? Imagine how much better it would be if I were in charge, If you took this piece of advice, right? It's the advice, right? Satan gave Eve advice on what to do. And that's very interesting where that spirit was coming from.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother level.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's an interesting dynamic because we get this, if you look at like cartoons or movie depictions or whatever, Satan's like this ugly, crazy guy, like running around all crazy. It's not what you see at all through the scripture, right? We know he's organized, as we see in the Gospels, right? Jesus says if Satan's divided against himself, then that's the end of Satan, right? You see even demons assigned to a region, Luke 9, right? So this is like an organized operation, and Satan is not, this crazy guy running around, or like many people think that he's in hell. He's not in hell. He's never been in hell. He's trying to avoid going to hell. Instead, what the Bible description is you have, on the day that he was created, it describes there's literally precious stones like as part of him. We wear earrings and chains and jewelry and all the above. It was literally like set into him, and he was beautiful, which is how his heart became proud on account of his beauty. And he works in those ways, like you're saying, of just deceiving people, where the things that he sets before you always look so good. Well, at the same time, he hates you. But he's the deceiver. It's not just this upfront like, oh, that's Satan. Oh, that's the work of Satan. It's often people thinking that it's something else, or it looks like a good thing, or it sounds good. And he's using that to just, as he did from the time of the garden, just usurp God in our lives.
Yeah, and you see the Lord letting this happening. This is the fallout of the judgment of the sin that David committed. And you know that the Lord's letting this happen, right? He literally prophesied over David, there will be calamity in your own household, right? And so this is a part of that. It makes me wonder, where was Satan in all of this? Because it doesn't directly say, right? But you can see, you make great points of that. You can see the spirit of Satan.
Yeah, the spirit.
And Satan just jumping on the opportunity here through all these things. Because Absalom had legitimate motivation and bitterness in his heart to take David down. Right? Once he saw what happened to his sister and how David reacted to it, you could see why Absalom thought the way he thought, did what he did. You wonder, was that all the wiggle room Satan needed to...
Yeah, this is ancient times too.
Yeah.
This was one of the biggest problems in ancient times with a monarchy, is who's the successor. Well, it's the son,
Yeah.
but the son is often getting pretty impatient with that.
Correct.
Right? That's where you see, like, Persian kings were known for sending the son, off to war to lead campaigns because it was like better there than causing problems here and maybe deciding, well, my time is now. And you see obviously a less of a resistance point with that because people see in Absalom as the natural successor to David. Well, Absalom is deciding that he's just going to move the timeline up. So you could see how this is attractive to people as well, where this isn't like some guy out of the blue. This is somebody who could potentially be the successor anyways. And you see people getting on board to this, and obviously they're very, just attracted to how he's behaving and how he's worming his way in here with people. And it says that he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. In 13, it says, a messenger came and told David, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword. So Absalom is now, this conspiracy has gained strength. We see here in verse 12 that David's counselor flips and joins Absalom's side as well. And it says his following kept on increasing. And now David's on the run here in verse 30. And we talked about, David, a type of Christ, right? Here it is. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went up. We talked about this last week, but it's such a penalty for sin that we hold on to, that we do not judge ourselves for, that we do not confess. Right? You see this just calamity happening now because of the sin that David committed and killing Uriah the Hittite and everything that went on there. The consequences blowing through that stop sign, right? Verse 31. Now David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom, Ahithophel being his counselor that had now flipped. So David prayed, O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. There's a lot to learn from that verse right there, because it wasn't like, how could he do that? How could he leave me? Why is he going with Absalom? Unbelievable, or feeling sorry for himself about that. It was immediately praying about it.
First response.
Right?
Yeah.
Let me pray about this. O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. And here's the answer to prayer. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I'll be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I'll be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. So many times we're looking for an answer to prayer and it being some kind of just major shift in circumstances, or God, make all these circumstances change for me. And the answer to prayer is usually who?
People.
Right? God's going to send you people. And that is the answer to prayer, is Hushai. So David's friend, Hushai, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. And that's what we want to really get into tonight, is just talking about the aspect of friendship and what defines a friend. Because you see here the definition now of Hushai is now referred to as his friend. What made him that friend?
Yeah, what made Hushai that friend for David was the fact that he stuck around even when David's circumstances changed. All right, so the contrast between Ahithophel, who was the counselor, but then flipped on him to become the counselor for Absalom, compared to Hushai, who it didn't matter if David was still in the palace or not, he was going to be loyal to him and be that friend to him and serve him and sharpen him and help him. The difference between the two is that, from what I see, Ahithophel was for what David was for, right? Ahithophel was partially selfish, but mainly concerned with who's in power and who's going to be running the kingdom in Israel, right? And so once he sees that it goes from David being the popular one, having favor with the people, to Absalom, and it's Absalom who's going to have the power, and it looks like Absalom's going to be king, all of a sudden it's like, okay, forget David, I'm going with Absalom. right? He was for the kingship, not the king, right? And so if Absalom was going to fulfill that, that's where his loyalty would then lie. All right, the difference between that and Hushai was Hushai didn't care about what David's circumstance or position was, right? He was sticking with David no matter what. All right, and that's the difference between, a constituent, someone who's for what the same cause as you or for what you are for, or like that confidant who's just for you. All right, Ahithophel was for what David was for. They were for the same thing, the kingdom, the kingship. Hushai, he was just for David, period.
Yeah, you're exactly hitting on it there. And most of the people in your life are going to be in that role of they are for it. They're for the cause.
The cause, yeah.
They're for the mission, and that's who you are mostly working with in your life, whether that be teammates or that's coworkers, employees. They're for what you are for, but they are not for you. And that's where so many people get confused and get hurt, because that person will leave you in a heartbeat if the circumstances change, or they think somebody else can get them what they want faster.
If there's a better cause.
Right, a better cause, or somebody can get them there, or they think that somebody can get them there. It doesn't mean they're right about that, but they think that, and they will leave you in a heartbeat because they were never for you in the first place. Right? That person that's for you, like you spoke about tonight, that is a small handful of people in your life, maybe 1, 2, or 3, that's actually filling that role of somebody you can actually, this person will weep when you weep. They rejoice when you rejoice. They will confront you. This isn't some false friendship where they are selfish and they are going to let you do the wrong thing or let you go the wrong way because they actually care about you. If somebody actually cares about you is when they're going to confront you, when they're going to give you real talk. It's the fake people that, just let you go your own way and let you fall, let you fail, because they're not for you. So if somebody's for you, they're going to actually confront you. They're going to get in your business a little bit. Yeah. Because they actually want the best for you. So that's a rare individual in your life. And a lot of people, though, confuse the two. They take those that are, for it, they're for it, thinking they're for them, and then they're very hurt. They're very bitter when that, circumstance change in life or seasons change in life, or that person bounces to, like you said, a better cause, or they think that somebody else can get them there faster, not realizing they were never for you in the first place. Yeah. Right? Like you're underscoring, Ahithophel was not for David. He was for it. So he pivots immediately to Absalom. Hushai, even when David is at his worst, he is head covered, barefoot, weeping, and here is Hushai. What do you need me to do? Yeah. And he's going to risk his life for David by going back into Jerusalem and trying to frustrate Ahithophel's advice to Absalom.
Yeah, the ultimate definition of a friend, the ultimate definition of a brother, the ultimate example of that, being willing to lay your life down for someone else, right? And Hushai was willing to do that. I think when you don't understand the difference between a confidant and constituent, someone who's for you versus someone who's for it can cause a lot of pain in your life. And I think one of the things that David got right here was he was very particular with who was around him. He understood friendship very, very well. Yeah. Right? I think that was one of the things that helped him not skip a beat when he got the news about Ahithophel and immediately just pray. Right? We talked about in weeks past where he ran into trouble from his own doing. He didn't pray.
Right.
He took the helm and he tried to be God and he tried to work everything together. When it came from opposition from others, all of a sudden, automatic response, I'm going to pray about it.
Yeah, right? Now he's getting it right.
He's getting it right. And you see the blessing from that to come for that, right? But David understood friendship so well. I think about Jonathan, actual friend for David. I think about Nathan. Nathan was willing to rebuke the king. Yeah. And follow through on on the word that the Lord decided to give him. Right? That is a true friend. You have Hushai right here. He had friends all around. You have people following him as he's leaving. Israel to go on the run, right? And they're asking what they could do, and he's telling them what to do. He had great people around him. He understood friendship, and that's what helped him handle this situation so much better. If you're broken, like many of us are, and you don't have that confidant in your life, a lot of times you'll be looking for that and forcing that onto a constituent.
Right.
And that's where you can experience pain. That's where you can experience setback. That's where you can have a lot of problems and delay a lot of things in your life, because you're confiding in people who are just for the cause, who are just for it. They're not necessarily for you. And you might have to walk that path, and we might get into this later, the way David did leading up to the Jonathans, and just go through that process until you get there.
Yeah. You made a good point with that tonight of just the dynamic where David is, he's anointed, not appointed. Mm-hmm. And he's in this kind of wood between worlds where great things are going to come his way and the Spirit of the Lord has come upon him in power. But there hasn't been that event yet in his life that's really validated him and gotten him around people of his quality. So initially he's still being surrounded by his brothers, like 1 Samuel 17, where his brother Eliab is just hating on him and attacking his gift. People just not respecting him. Then it's finally, once he has that, killing of Goliath, that kind of watershed event in his life where he proves himself and proves his greatness. Mm-hmm. Now he has this friendship with Jonathan that really just elevates his life, takes him to another level. And it's important to note, he's already in the palace in 1 Samuel 16. So Jonathan would have seen him. Mm-hmm. Nothing happened there.
Yeah.
Because that's just not how it works. It's like everybody wants to be, friends with the superstar and be friends with the guy who's, just got it locked in, and that's who they want to associate with and be friends with. You got to get to that level first yourself.
Yeah. Why would someone be your friend?
Right. Exactly. What do you bring to the table?
Yeah.
Because friendships are reciprocal. Mm-hmm. Once he kills Goliath, now it says Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself.
Yeah.
And Jonathan made a covenant with David. This is 1 Samuel 18. Made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. There's a little insight into love, because Corinthians tells you that love does not envy. Mm-hmm. So Jonathan was not envious of David having this great moment of victory over Goliath, like Saul was, because Saul got very envious over this. Jonathan wasn't threatened by this because he saw in him his, like spirit, right? Jonathan was this awesome warrior himself. We know that from 1 Samuel 14. And now he sees his like counterpart in David.
Yep.
And he's giving him these gifts. Love will always find something to give.
Yes.
If somebody says that they love you and they never give you anything, be suspicious.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, you'll know by their actions for sure.
Right.
And I love the word you say there, counterpart. Right. I love the C.S. Lewis quote when it comes to friendship. When friends come together, they realize they're friends when they say, "Oh, you too?"
Yeah. Uh-huh.
When you're able to see that in another person, and you want that, that's when you know you're on the right pace, right? Like that's when you know you're on the right road in friendship. Mm-hmm. Is when you're becoming that person, and you can then recognize that in others. Mm-hmm. That's the most healthy dynamic of friendship, right? And I think we live in a society that is so lonely, right? Yeah. We're just dying to have friends.
Yeah, statistically, they said, well, was it in, I believe they did this first in 2003, and it was 3% of men said they did not have a close friend. So a very small percentage. It's now 1 in 7.
Yeah, which goes to show, like, I don't know if that's, all the glowing rectangles we have now. I don't know if that's social media, just the phone in general, the internet in general. Studies seem to indicate that's the case.
Less real life communities.
Correct, yeah. And you see the negative side effects of that. People want friends. They want to have as many friends as possible on social media. They care about their ratio on Instagram. And what the Bible says about that, this comes from Proverbs 12, verse 26. It says, a righteous man is cautious in friendship, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. So we're supposed to be mindful. It'd be wise of us to be mindful of who is our friend, who is around me, and who has the Lord put around me, and what role do they have in my life? Am I paying any mind to that, and am I fulfilling that in others' lives as well?
Yeah, I mean, the reality of life is that, you talk about that confidant role in your life, or a confidant person in your life that you said would be 1, 2, maybe, total for a life. Understand that in my opinion, 2 things. You don't know if somebody's a friend until your circumstances go bad.
Until you face trouble.
Right. That's the proving of the friendship, like you saw with Hushai, right? Because it goes from Hushai to David's friend Hushai. He literally proved his friendship there, where he could have done anything. He could have just avoided the situation entirely. He obviously could have just sided with Absalom. Instead, he's going to do the most dangerous thing possible because of his love for David. That's a real friend, right? And then the other thing to point out about that is that I think people and you don't want to be cynical with this. Just understand that if you're bringing your problems and your struggles to people that are, to someone that is not your confidant, they're probably happy on a certain level you have them. Or they just don't care.
Yeah, and that's just reality.
You're right. That's just human nature. So don't get cynical about people, and don't be angry about that. But that's just who they are. The old thing is, the next time that you share good news with somebody, watch people's reactions.
See if they're actually happy for
right.
you. Right. And when I read Proverbs 12:26, that's what I think of is I'm going to be cautious in who I share that news with, right? I'm not going to be cynical towards people. I'm not going to treat them bad. I'm not going to treat them a certain way, even if they're not for me, right? Like a good example of like constituents of people who are for it would be like a team, right? That could be a team of like a business. That could be a team like in sports, right? Sports is probably the greatest example. It's like good
teammates,
yeah. That's not good or bad. Like it is what it is, right? Whatever season, I don't care if it's the NBA or college or high school. Like you have one season with that exact team, and then it changes,
right?
And that's not good or bad. It is what it is. Like make the most of it, right? The Lord put you in that situation. He put those teammates around you and those coaches around you for a reason, right? I don't believe that just happens coincidentally, right? So sharpen them. Be a blessing in their life. Be light in their life. Love them, right? And even if they're not for you personally, like that's not a bad thing. It just is what it is. And it takes a level of discernment and maturity to understand that and still, not be cynical. But
just don't be hurt if they're saying things behind your back.
Yeah,
like people are gonna do.
Yeah.
Don't be hurt if they secretly seek your demise, like many people do. You said that tonight. I don't want people praying for me that don't want my best interests in mind.
Yeah.
and you're right. It's you'd rather have somebody just not praying for you than somebody who's saying like, oh, I'm going to pray for you, but they really hope it doesn't turn your way.
Yeah.
You'll get people like that. But, once again, we're not, I'm not advocating being cynical. It's just understanding that then you're not hurt and react in a way when, somebody is talking bad about you, or they're talking behind your back, or they're, secretly seeking your demise, right? You're going to have a lot of people like that in your life, and they're still going to shake your hand at church and smile and how's everything, and that's fine. They're just not for you, so don't expect that out of them.
Yeah.
Don't have this ridiculous expectation that they're going to stick with you through thick and thin. When you have bad circumstances, they are going to bounce.
Yeah.
And they are going to pile on.
Yeah.
Sometimes even through other people. Yeah. Right? The old expression, right, is it's throwing the rocks but hiding their hands, right? Where they're going to get at you through other people. That's just how people are, but if you understand that, then you're not going to be hurt and bitter over that. And instead you can really build into, like David did,
yes,
his quality relationships, with Jonathan. And I wish we had more time to just go into the dynamic of Jonathan, but that there's just your great example of a true friendship in the Bible where Jonathan, David's on the run, and and it says that David then, David is hiding at Horish in the desert of Ziph. This is 1 Samuel 23, and Jonathan went to David and helped him find strength in God.
Yeah.
Right? That, you're at your worst, you're on the run with this ragtag group. Jonathan's own father, Saul, is trying to kill David.
Yeah.
And Jonathan is still out there helping him find strength in God through this.
Yeah, and that's just the value of friendships and the blessing that they can be in your life. And that's something to pray over. But I think the hard thing is how things ought to be in the church and how things actually are,
Right.
Because people are fallen.
Right.
We're all fallen, right? So it's not going to work perfectly. It ought to be we
Right.
love each other as ourselves.
Right. You made a great point tonight that when you're talking about believers, it should, that whole dynamic of just, well, I'm not, I'm just for what you are for, therefore here comes the sniping and the slander and, hoping for secretly seeking people's demise, all that should go out the window.
Yeah.
Because we're believers.
Correct.
And by this, all men will know that you are my disciples.
Exactly.
Right.
If you love one another, right? And so with that is, I am for you. Because ultimately, beyond you, I'm for the kingdom.
Right.
I'm for the advancement of the gospel. I'm for Jesus Christ. And I see Jesus Christ in you.
Yeah.
And I want to sharpen you. I want the best for you. And I know that you want the best for me.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
As yourself, right?
Right. We all know that we love ourselves.
Yeah.
Can we love our neighbor like that?
And if we do, we'd be able to see that. And there would be deep friendships from the church. And oftentimes there are. I'm not here to say there aren't. The difference between what there ought to be and what there is, I'm trying to bridge that gap by saying that, right?
Yeah.
And so if you understand that, people are going to be people and, they're going to let you down from time to time. They're not always going to be for you.
Yeah.
All of a
Don't be
sudden,
hurt by that. Yep.
if you just know that,
Yeah.
you can react like David reacted. And when they do switch up on you, not even in secret, in front of everybody, they actually turn against you. They're not just secretly happy you're failing. They're willingly going against you now.
Yep.
To not even hesitate, but pray and focus on who stayed.
Right.
Because that's the difference.
Right.
It's not about who leaves.
Yeah.
If someone can walk out of your life,
Let them go.
let them walk.
Yeah.
It's not about who left. Because if they could leave, they didn't have the power to stay. Right? If they have the power to stay, David shows you the blessing that comes from that, from true friendship here that we found in 2 Samuel 15. Those who stay, that's where your blessing is. That's where your breakthrough is. That's where your help is. That's where the Lord can work.
Yeah.
Right? Always focus on who stayed, never on who left. That's where your real friends are.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up. Literally John 6, right? Jesus gives a hard teaching. Verse 66, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. It's such an interesting section of scripture because you expect Jesus to run after him and be like, no, you guys don't understand. No, you misunderstand me. Instead, verse 67, you do not want to leave too, do you? Jesus asked the 12. All that left couldn't stay. All that stayed couldn't leave. Right? So Jesus turned to those who stayed and strengthened those who remained. Right? He's not trying to chase after those that left. Like you said, if they can leave, right? And these are all just real world applicable things in terms of, dealing with something that can be so hard for us when relationships, are ruptured, as they inevitably are.
Yeah.
Whether that just be, the seasons, the circumstances, whatever, but just dealing with that in a very real world way, like you're saying, evaluating your friendships, considering what role is this person in my life, not confusing roles.
Yeah.
and then strengthening those who remain.
Yeah, because it's not good for men to be alone. And at the end of the day, we know we need each other, right? All the many of the blessings, most of the blessings in your life are going to come through other people. We need each other, right?
Yeah.
It's not good for men to be alone. Like Fensky just said, you just want to have the right attitude and the right discernment, the right level of wisdom.
Cautious in friendship.
In assessing that,
Yeah.
right? So that's the fallout of David's sin, Absalom's conspiracy, and David's response to it. It's a very deep topic of friendship. There's so much about friendship that impacted this sequence here, and so that's the summary of it.
Yeah, next week we'll get into the advice of Ahithophel versus the advice of Hushai and how everything pivoted off that, talking about just counsel and who to listen to, who not to listen to. Monday Night Pod, Tyler and Fensky.